Hi, and thanks for joining me in this video on instrument design and selection. In this video, we're going to talk about instrument error. Instrument error can be classified several different ways. They can be classified as either static or dynamic error, drift error, or exposure error. Static error occurs when the input is steady and the output is constant. And this is a systematic type of error. It's one that occurs every time as a result of some error or some mistake in either calibration or other things. A good example is a thermometer that was improperly calibrated. Another example is a ruler. A ruler is typically 12 inches. If you lay it out in the sun, it'll expand to a certain extent, and then every time you make a measurement, not dealing with time, just making a measurement, you'll be off by a number of inches or fractions of inches. So that's static error. Static error is also kind of considered systematic error. Every time making a measurement, there will be error, and it's steady. It doesn't really change. Another example also is a thermometer. If the thermometer is improperly calibrated, then you will always be off 2 degrees Celsius, for example, every time you make a measurement. And that is also another type of systematic error. Dynamic error, once again, the word dynamic implies time. So this is when things are changing with time. You have a changing input. And it may be changing so fast that the instrument can't respond to the rapid changing input. If the input is held constant, if it's not changing, then typically the dynamic error will disappear. An example of dynamic error is when you do airborne weather research. You're flying an aircraft with instrumentation, and the instrumentation may not be fast enough to measure small properties, small changes in properties as you fly through the air. You think about maybe a 1 second time lag in an instrument, and in an airplane that would be about maybe 100 to 200 feet of distance that you travel. So you wouldn't be able to resolve measurements to within 200 feet, and that would be considered a type of dynamic error. Another example of dynamic error, if rainfall rate increases with time, perhaps the rain will fall out of the rain gauge as the rainfall rate increases, and you'll have an increasing error with increasing rainfall rate. So that would be considered dynamic error also. Drift error occurs when the instrument changes over time, the sensor changes over time. It can happen gradually or abruptly, and this is a result of an instrument going out of calibration. So it would be good to calibrate your instrument often to make sure that you're getting the proper values, the correct values. Another type of error is exposure error, and this is when the instrument is not perfectly coupled to what you're trying to measure. So in other words, the sensor and the environment are not well coupled. Examples are, once again, we talked about this before in other videos. If you put a thermometer out in the sun, it's not measuring air temperature, it's measuring solar radiation. So you want to make sure that thermometers are in shade so that they are measuring just the air temperature. Another example is if you have an instrument that is close to a building, it may be influenced by the building itself or tall trees or other things like that. An example of this is an anemometer. We had at one time a weather station in the parking lot of Clifford Hall, but with the winds out of the south, you got a good measurement of wind speed. But when the winds are out of the north, you got a lot of turbulence and a lot of fluctuation over the anemometer, so you're really not measuring the steady state wind. So those are some examples of instrument error. In other videos, we'll look at other types of characteristics with meteorological instruments.